This program is proudly brought to you by Telecom Limited and Daytech.
Good night, Papua New Guinea. I'm Malcolm Waira, and welcome to another edition of Infocus. Now, as we look towards celebrating 50 years of independence, corruption and good governance has proven to be somewhat of a challenge. This has prompted the establishment of various anti-corruption agencies, with the most recent being the Independent Commission Against Corruption, or ICAC. Joining us for discussions is ICAC's Deputy Commissioner Operations, Mr. Daniel Balch, and Deputy Commissioner for Prevention and Corporate, Mr. Graham Gill. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, one of our late senior statesmen and former Prime Minister, Sir Mekere Morauta, he described corruption as systemic and systematic. To what extent is this an accurate description of corruption in Papua New Guinea?
Well, I'd suggest that he probably hit the nail on the head. It's been an issue, as I said, for a very long time. International estimates would suggest that Papua New Guinea loses between 20 and 25% of its national budget to corruption, fraud, waste and error each year. So that's in the range of 7 to 8 billion kina per year. So that is a huge number. So it's the equivalent of losing the Papua New Guinean national budget every 5 years. So that's not just corruption, but it's also waste and error. So it speaks to efficiency and integrity in the system. People have said that Papua New Guinea basically has a political economy where your money is taken out from top to bottom. There's nepotism, there's favouritism, there's money for power. That's what people have said, and I'm not going to dispute that. What I would suggest is actually the public service is probably an extractive industry. I would suggest that people are setting up means to extract money from the top to the bottom out of the system. You've got leaders of organisations who are setting up hire car companies, accommodation, employing their own relatives as consultants. Now, from where I come from in New Zealand, that is just unheard of behaviour, but here it seems to be the norm. It is corrupt conduct, it is theft, it is fraud, it is corruption. Leaders of public sector organisations are there to deliver results. They're not there to put their own personal interests ahead of the public's interests. And that's a very important point. So Papua New Guinea needs a bit of a spirit of service in the public service, in that you are there to serve the public, you're not there to serve yourself. And so that's a very important point, and that all flows through to people extracting money out of the system. They do it with impunity. The ICAC is in place, and it will be our mission to stop that and send some pretty clear signals to people in the public service that kind of behaviour just isn't acceptable anymore.
Now, Daniel, we have quite a lot of anti-corruption agencies that have been established since independence. How does ICAC differ from the existing anti-corruption agencies and institutions in Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, Malcolm. We do say that there's been a lot of agencies, but I suppose how many real agencies have there actually been? I mean, when it comes, you think of agencies that currently exist. I mean, there's the Ombudsman's Commission, which was not a predecessor to us, but it's been in existence for some time now as a constitutional office. I know there's been talks of Task Force Sweep as well too from some time ago, and some of the success that they had. But Task Force Sweep wasn't a long-term initiative. It wasn't embedded into the fabric of the country and into the governance, into the system of the country, as Graham sort of talked about. You really need to look at what is the impact that an anti-corruption agency can have on the system. When you look at agencies like the ICAC, we've got some really sort of unique powers and responsibilities, but implementing an ICAC can be a really, I suppose a cornerstone, that flag in the ground moment where you say, this is what we're going to do and this is our level of commitment. And when you look at that, you've got to look at things like our legislation and say, well, how much does that actually empower the ICAC to do the things that it needs to do? What sort of resourcing and support do you give your anti-corruption agency? Those things are actually really, really key. At the moment, our settings are pretty good as an anti-corruption agency. We're probably a bit different to some of the agencies in Australia where I come from in the anti-corruption space. And to be frank, a lot of that's just purely because of the size of the problem here of corruption. It's widespread, it's ingrained. As Graham said, it's part of the system. And the size of what is getting stolen, and I'm not talking about that overall picture, but even in individual matters, we're talking tens of millions, hundreds of millions of kina, which gets taken from the system. And quite often there's very, very little efforts to even cover it up. And we've got to really look at, well, what's the change to the system going to be to how we address that? Is absolutely key. So I quoted a statistic the other day, and it was something I actually, I think it came from the police from a few years back. It was in the print media, and we worked at some of the numbers in terms of what the conviction rate in this country is, and it's 22%. So 22 out of 100 people who are charged with a crime only end up getting convicted or found guilty at the court. That's disturbing. I mean, that's probably well off a lot of other countries like where I come from, and Victoria specifically when I was in policing. You had a conviction rate there of around about 90% of people who went before the court for a crime pleaded guilty. So the strength of the evidence of what was brought before the court brought people to heel and actually acknowledged, accepted their wrong and moved on. And then out of that remaining 10% who then challenged, their case, over half of those were then found guilty. So you look at 95% of cases, you'd have a finding of guilt. So the matter was actually proven. If we're only proving it 22 times out of 100, that's quite damaging. And that's where the ICAC really needs to be, to enforce those laws, enforce the system, and make sure we actually get the right results. And we're looking to have, I suppose, an end-to-end process as much as we possibly can. Whilst maintaining the independence of the judiciary, that's obviously important. But we need to be asking questions. If that's what a conviction rate looks like in this country, why is it? And I think it's actually really unfair to lay all of that at the feet of the police. I think it's a systemic issue and how we approach law and justice in this country, and it needs some rework.
Thank you, Daniel. We'll now go for a quick break. Join us on the other side for more discussions. Welcome back. You're watching Infocus. Now, Graham, in terms of the laws that have been passed, I understand the ICAC is governed under the organic law on the Independent Commission Against Corruption. What are the specific powers prescribed in this act?
At a broad brush, the ICAC may do a number of things around prevention and engagement, communications, issue reports, undertake research, and that's kind of set up to kind of influence and change the country's settings around corruption. Specifically around what I'd call the enforcement side of the organisation, we've got some pretty robust powers. So there are things such as search warrants, statutory notices requiring people to supply information. ICAC officers can enter onto any public premises for the purposes of an investigation and gather certain evidence. We have powers for holding commission hearings. So they are a thing that's quite big in Australia, in which we can summons someone along. They have to answer the questions. There are some certain protections that are in place around that. So what it means is we can have those hearings in public if we want to expose an issue, or we can have them in private. So they're a very good tactical tool to get information. So if for example, you were a witness to a matter and you were a little bit reluctant to talk to us, we can summons you along to a commission hearing and you have to turn up. If you don't, that's an offence in of itself. We also do have powers to do electronic surveillance, and that's a capacity that or capability that we will be building over a number of years. And also our officers have the power of arrest in relation to prosecution. So we apply for a warrant for arrest, and our officers can execute those warrants. And obviously we can take prosecutions as well. So if it's a matter of corrupt conduct, we can lay the charges. There's questions whether we would take the matter forward or whether the Office of the Public Prosecutor would, and we're working our way through with that. Probably more likely than not it'll be the Office of the Public Prosecutor. And so there are protections within those processes also to maintain the ICAC's independence, so that no one can interfere and try and block what we are doing in relation to investigating a matter of corrupt conduct.
In the process of filing a complaint, how can the public file a allegation or a complaint?
Yeah, look, I suppose what we want to do, Malcolm, is to have it as easily accessible for all people, and probably the easiest way, and you completely understand that not every person in Papua New Guinea is going to be connected to the internet, but just going to www.icac.gov.pg, and all the details are there. There's links through to where you can actually lodge a complaint online around corrupt conduct. But having said that, we take phone calls. We have people walk into our office. We have people write to us. In an envelope, they'll provide us with documents and materials and things like that. If needed and if warranted, if you give us a call, we'll even come and see you if needed to get the details of what your complaint actually is. So it's about being as open as we possibly can with people, encouraging them to report, but also understanding that we can't investigate every complaint we get. We do our best. If it meets our criteria, we'll do our best to look at it, and then we also need to make decisions around the resources we have available to us and whether or not we have the ability to actually follow up on the matter.
What sorts of complaints would fall under the ICAC jurisdiction? Our
complaints should be about corrupt conduct, and corrupt conduct is actually quite broad. When you look at the definitions under the Act, it can be an abuse of your office, it can be a misuse of your power or authority, which is quite often what most corruption actually is. Because if you take money out of your budget and use it for yourself, that's a power you have and you've misused it. But you can also misuse your power for influence in other ways as well too. And they're also the things that we're interested in. We do look at, I suppose, the seriousness of the overall corrupt conduct in making a decision whether or not it's a matter we're going to take on. And sometimes that can just boil down to a decision of how much money was actually taken. We'll also look at matters that might have already been looked at by other bodies. So if the police have already investigated, the Ombudsman's Commission have already investigated the matter, or the matter's been before a court and a decision's been made by that court. Quite often that may not necessarily prevent us from looking at it, but we still need to make decisions that if it's been looked at before, we may not want to do that again. So we need to sometimes accept those previous decisions of the court and just look at what we look at next.
Now, Graham, how many complaints have you received so far since your establishment?
We've received around about 190 complaints since we were established. We've opened around 18 investigations, and we are actively advancing those. So a lot of times we get questions, is the ICAC operational? And yes, we are. So we are, as Dan said, we're receiving complaints and we are actively investigating matters. So I think that's a clear signal to people who might be wishing to commit corruption or have that the ICAC is out there. We are starting to develop our capacity and our capability. Now, I should just talk about a couple of technical skills that our team have. So we've employed specialist forensic accountants who have the ability to, in broad brush terms, trace the money, because it's not just about prosecuting people, it's also about recovering the stolen funds. We've got a digital forensics officer who's come from New Zealand, and so he can analyse mobile phones, laptops, devices for evidence, because you need that kind of multi-skilled approach to tackle corruption. It's just as simple as having an investigator interview someone. These matters can be very complex, but equally, a lot of what we're seeing is just pretty straightforward theft. It is people stealing money, and it is relatively easy to detect. We want people to come and tell us about it so that we can investigate and prosecute, but a lot of it at the moment is pretty straightforward. At the far end of the spectrum, if you get a really complex foreign bribery case, that can take up to 4 years to investigate on international standards. So there's a big kind of spectrum of offending, but what we're seeing at the moment is not that hidden. It's pretty obvious, and people have just got away with it for impunity for quite a few years.
Now, Daniel, in a nutshell, how does a complaint progress into investigation and subsequently prosecution if need be?
Yeah, so basically, it is quite simple in a nutshell. The file comes to us. We have powers to assess the matter. So we have an assessment team which then looks at the file, makes a determination or recommendation if it is corrupt conduct, and what the issues are, as per our legislation. The next step is then it needs to go, if it's going to be approved as an investigation, it'll get approved by the Commission. So the three commissioners we will all look at it, or it requires at least 2 commissioners to approve an investigation, and we'll go through that process. It then gets referred down to our investigators, of which our investigations team is growing, but we're still relatively small for where we need to be. And they need to go out and find the requisite evidence. And the reality is, there's different standards of the law we need to work to, and everything we see, or most of the things that we are working on, I can't think of a matter that we've currently got that isn't a crime. So that means they need to find evidence that proves that matter beyond reasonable doubt. Once that's done, it's then looked at also by our legal division. So they'll assess the evidence, make a recommendation if there's sufficiency to prosecute the matter. And then basically, I won't go into the details of it, but we work with the public prosecutor, and we'll make a determination whether or not they're going to take the matter on and prosecute, or we'll use our own in-house ICAC prosecutors and put the matter before the court.
Thank you, Daniel. We'll now go for a quick break. Join us on the other side for more discussions. Welcome back. You're watching Infocus. Now, Daniel, there is a emerging threat of money laundering which is currently happening in Papua New Guinea, and it's been highlighted by the international media as well as domestic Papua New Guinean media houses. What is the link between corruption and money laundering?
I think it's important to sort of talk about the fact that money laundering isn't necessarily emerging, just that the expectations around what we do on the international scale and expectations from international bodies and our nations is really growing, and it's quite high. It's really clear in Papua New Guinea that we haven't been addressing money laundering properly. A link between corruption and money laundering at the most simplest level is basically when you steal the money through corruption, you've got to do something with it. And so you've got to either move it into your own possession or a business or overseas, and so you've got then access to it and enjoy the use of that asset or that money as a result of the crime. And resource, we will have some wins. But I think what corruption causes money laundering it's also symptomatic of a system that doesn't have its settings right. It doesn't have its controls right in terms of how we address law and order, what's our governance look like in the public service, how we're actually managing budget and money. And the reality is of a lot of this money laundering is it's public funds, is the money that's being taken. And that's where that really strong link is. It's if we don't have strong independent bodies that actually investigate these things properly, if we don't have a judiciary that then addresses them through findings of guilt and through appropriate sentencing, this is a problem that's going to last for a long, long time. We also need to have those really, really tight financial controls in monitoring, and that's really key as well too.
Just a few months ago, the ICAC launched the Anti-Money Laundering Joint Task Force. What are its key operational objectives?
Collaboration is key in the fight against money laundering. There's some agencies that have all have different parts to play in this. What we say is the keys to that are people like FASU, so the Financial Intelligence Unit at the Bank of PNG, us as ICAC, because corruption is the predicate offence for most money laundering in this country. So what that means is that most money that leaves the country or is stolen is a result of corruption. The police also have a remit in that space and have for a long time through their National Fraud and Anti-Corruption Directorate. And then finally, the public prosecutor, we need them to prosecute. So with those being the four sort of key agencies you talk about, there's a whole raft of other agencies that we need to think about in their involvement. Customs, the ICAC, so immigration, tax, the Investment Promotion Authority and company registrations, things like the Auditor General's Office. It's about cooperation. But there's also a big piece around coordination. So we're at a time now where we need to act really, really quickly. We can no longer just continue to have high-level strategic plans and coordinating committees. We all turn up and meet once every month, once every 3 months, and nothing happens. The time for action is really now.
Now, finally, Graham, are there any future plans for ICAC that the public should be looking forward to?
Look, we've got some very big plans for the ICAC. I think ultimately the agency will be a lot bigger than it is. We will have a nationwide footprint, but at the moment, our planning is at getting the organisation up and out of the ground and fully operational. So last year we launched our strategic plan, which set out 6 priority areas, 4 external, which are kind of operational focused and prevention and communications, and 2 are internal, because it's very important that we build our proper corporate infrastructure. And we've done a lot of that over the last 18 months. But that kind of sets out our planning for the next 3 years. I think it's a pretty good document that sets that out. But what I would say is 2 things. One is what we've noticed since we've been in PNG, and Dan touched on this, is there are a lot of great plans put in place. People launch their annual plans, their strategic plans, but actually it's the follow through and the delivery on that. So activity isn't a result. You've got to actually focus on results. And the second thing is that the ICAC is set up to work with other agencies. That is our purpose under our organic law and actually under the Constitution as well. And so what we want to do is build up that kind of cohort of the willing of agencies who will work with us and alongside us, develop MOUs if we need to, but MOU is just a thing. In actual fact, we need to have coordinated action and working alongside agencies. So we're kind of working on that. And I should just speak kind of on behalf of kind of part of my side of the organisation, is our prevention and engagement team are out now working in the provinces, building our engagement at the local level. They visited in the region of about 20 provinces. We are working with various partners to build on that. And then ultimately in that area, we will start building prevention activities. So working alongside a community of interest, a community practice within the public sector to lift some of those settings and practices to actually effectively harden the target so that money isn't lost. So you're kind of tackling the problem from 2 sides. You've got the hardening the target at the bottom and tackling it from the top with investigation, prosecutions, arrests, and the like. So that kind of pincer movement will ultimately, in the long term, be successful.
Mr. Graham Gill and Mr. Daniel Bolch, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, viewers, that ends this episode of Infocus. Do join us again next week, Monday, on our regular time slot of 7 p.m. Till then, bye for now.
This program was proudly brought to you by Telecom Limited. and DayTech.